do better just to go to a store that didn't have the card. But now 80% of people have gotten comfortable with the idea of having their every food purchase monitored into a database. Okay. So I would say that's maybe the first step to getting people accustomed to the idea of presenting identity in order to buy and sell. And now let me say something else before we get to this tax issue. There are a couple of ways that I've been thinking about in the last few years that you could move from an optional scan the card or pay $6 for $4 worth of cheese, which I guess if you want to pay the extra money, you can still get away without doing it. What would it take to make it mandatory that you must present an identification in order to buy food? Well, it's not like guns, is it? It's not really like fireworks or explosives. It's not really dangerous. I mean, food? How could it be possible that someone could require you to show ID to buy food? Doesn't make sense. Well, let me give you a couple scenarios. Scenario number one, a terrorist gets a hold of some factory and puts cyanide in the baby food. And the strained peas now are toxic. The people who've scanned their loyalty card, like dutiful, obedient consumers, have registered their purchase of those strained peas in the database, and they get the phone call from the public health officials, frantic. You bought those peas last week. You've got to throw them away. They're toxic, right? The people who didn't scan their loyalty card, who either shopped at a store that didn't have one or were like me and said, I refuse to use that thing, those folks, unfortunately, would have some pretty tragic accidents, and people would die. And believe me, that would be all over the television, the pictures of the beautiful, 6-month-old baby who ate the strained peas. And at that point, I could see Congress getting involved and saying, well, it's certainly not fair that people who live in, nice neighborhoods with wonderful stores that have these cards get a chance to register their purchases. But these people who live in other neighborhoods or don't have access to those kind of stores, it's not fair that they should be the ones who run the risk of not knowing about a product recall if something gets tainted. In fact, you know what we'll do as Congress? I think we'll just make some appropriations and we'll say we will provide some matching funds to all of those stores who don't have the program, and we'll help you out. And we'll set that up so that everybody who buys the strained peas has an opportunity to register in the database. We won't make it mandatory or anything. I mean, certainly you wouldn't want to force people to do it, but we certainly want to give them that option if they'd like. And then let's say down the road, you let that sink in for 3, 5 years, 10 years. You let people get real used to the idea that good moms scan their purchases with the credit card. Good moms record their purchases because good moms want to know if something's wrong with the food they're feeding Junior. And insurance companies would say, well, gee, if you're one of those moms that scans all your purchases, we'll give you a break on your insurance. We'll give you a couple of different incentives to make you do it. And then down the road, it's going to be, just like today, only 20% of households don't participate in those programs. Down the road, maybe only 20% or even 5% or 2% of people aren't scanning like good little moms scanning their purchases. And at that point, then, Congress just says, you know what, that's just not safe. In fact, if you're not scanning your purchases and recording everything that you're buying, it could be tainted. We're going to consider that you may be a dangerous parent. Maybe we'll take your kids away unless you do it. So there's scenario number one of how you could actually say, you know what, to make a purchase, you've just got to register it because it wouldn't be safe otherwise. Let me give you scenario number two. There is something out there called the Fair Tax Act of 2003. Many of you may have heard of it. It's an extremely popular proposal. The Fair Tax Act of 2003 would replace the income tax system with a sales tax system. Right? Now, I'm going to tell you right now, it is the worst thing I have ever heard of. Let me tell you why. And I know those of you nodding are probably nodding because you think it's the greatest thing you ever heard of, because it sounds pretty great. Well, first of all, the income tax system as it currently stands is an absolute wreck. We all know it. It is invasive. It pries into every aspect of our life. Even the IRS officials themselves cannot give valid advice about what that tax code says because it's this thick. Nobody can plow their way through it. It is a nightmare. We have a nightmare taxation system in this country that absolutely does not work, and it does need to be reformed. I will be the first to admit it. But let me tell you how you don't want to reform it. You do not want to reform it with a national sales tax. Let me tell you why. Global sales tax. All right. From income tax to global sales tax, question mark. All right. This is a quote here. Dissatisfaction with the current income tax continues to generate interest in broad-based tax reform. In particular, there's considerable interest in moving from our current income tax to a consumption tax. Now, this comes from the think tank, the Cato Institute. And in fact, they devote a policy analysis paper back in 1997 when this was first proposed that actually took a look at what might be the problem with this. and addressed what might be some inequalities associated with it. Let me talk about if you switch. It's not putting aside revelations for the moment, just looking at taxation. If you switch away from our current system, which has graduated taxes, people at the lower end of the income scale don't pay any tax. People at the higher end pay a very large proportion of their income in tax. And the idea is that it sort of taxes the rich, kind of a Robin Hood idea, taxes the rich, doesn't tax the poor. If you switch to sales tax, let's say we said everybody's going to pay 25% sales tax from this moment on. Well, that's a problem because the rich only spend a certain small portion of their income every month, let's say 2%, to live. And the rest of it can all sort of go into funds and accounts and other places. So it's not being spent and no taxes are being paid on it. The poor, on the other hand, there are many people who, by the time their 2-week paycheck comes around, they've already spent everything from their previous 2-week paycheck. And they would be paying 25% of all of that. So there's an inequality, an inequity in a global taxation system or a sales taxation system. Now, this is addressed over and over. This is what this policy analysis paper is about. Let me give you the solution. The solution is if I could identify who you were, I could set your specific sales tax rate at the point of sale, right at the cash register. So in fact, if I could identify that you, Susan Peterson over there, are in a lower income bracket, and you should only be paying 5% tax, then by identifying you in real time, looking you up in the database, and selling to you, I can deduct only 5%, and in real time send it straight to the government. On the other hand, if I learn that you over there, Joe McIntyre, you're making $500,000 a year, I can say, well, you need to be taxed at a 60% tax rate when you buy your new Ferrari. I look you up in the database, I identify you, and you get your own unique sales tax rate right at the point of sale in real time. Now, that would solve all of the problems with this universal sales tax plan. It would solve them in real time. It would solve them very efficiently and for good. And we would be rid of this awful and annoying income tax system that we have now. Now, here's the problem. If you don't identify yourself at the point of sale and you don't pay your tax, you will be breaking the law. You will be committing tax fraud. And you'll go to jail. So if we move to this system where I have to say, here's me, I can verify certainly that it's me. I didn't just borrow my friend's ID to say I'm in the 5% tax bracket. But I presented something that's unique to me, that can be identified specifically with me, like a biometric, like a fingerprint, like an iris scan, like a DNA sample. Then you'd know for sure that I really am me, and that I really do qualify for that lower tax rate rather than the higher tax rate. So there's two ways right off the bat that I can think of right now where it would be possible to require identity in order to make a purchase. All right. Now, a couple years back, an official with the Federal Reserve Bank made a proposal, something called the carry tax. And his idea, I believe this was in 1999, was that cash should carry a magnetic strip that, as the cash is issued from an ATM card or from a bank, would actually identify the date. It would keep track of the date that it was issued. And if you held on to it longer than a certain period of time, it would begin deducting in value. So in other words, your dollar might suddenly become worth 99 cents after a couple months, and then 98 cents after a couple months. And when you went to cash it or spend it or deposit it into the bank, you would take maybe let's say you took $300 bills, and you'd held on to them for a year. You'd take them to the bank, and you'd go, here, I want to deposit this. And they go, oh, yeah, that's $260 we'll deposit. And the other $40 we'll give to the federal government as tax. It was actually a proposal. It was met with a lot of unhappy responses in Congress. It was not a popular proposal, but it's a proposal that's been floating around for a while, this idea of tagging cash and keeping track of what it does. All right. And we'll get back to that in a sec, because I want to talk about how cash plays into this whole system of using numbers to buy and sell, because cash would seem to be an exception to that. All right. There is, and you can't see it on this image, and I wish you could, because do you see? This is from NTT, which is a Japanese company. They've developed an identification system using DNA, similar to what I was talking about, where you would actually identify the individual and make sure they were the right person, claiming to be the right person, fully identified for a purchase. Well, on their card here, they actually have this little thing in the bottom right. Underneath it, it says DNA certification mark. And there would actually be an encoded mark on there representing an individual's DNA. In fact, a couple months ago in England, one of the original discoverers